We have one more presenter, the endlessly talented Michaela Laird. Michaela, take it away.
Thank you. I don't know if I have the honor or the short straw of following everyone. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Michaela J. Laird. I am a comics doctor in training. I am a former student of the esteemed Danny Graydon, who you all just heard from, and the Robin of the Superhero Project, the only delegate that was not in that photo because I took the photo. Now, what I wanted to present today is just a short snippet of my research, and it does sort of tie together everything we've been talking about why studying comics and studying superheroes is so important. So, like I said, I am a doctoral student, and I look at how time is portrayed within comics. And it may sound a little bit of an obvious thing to look at, but by breaking down these techniques that artists and writers use, we can understand and better communicate the passage of time within comics. What you're seeing on screen now is like 2 extracts of a chapter that is going to be rewritten a million times, I'm sure. But one of the first things we might logically consider is panel layout and construction. And this is indeed important, as how panels are presented and layout determine how your eye navigates the page and the order in which you will see each panel. And of course, this goes slow to move. Thank you. And the same is also true for carriers, which is the collective name for things like narrative caption and speech balloons. So how they're positioned relative to both the panel and each other will guide your eye of how you read it through. Even smaller details, such as a character's relative positioning or facial expressions changing between panels, can give the reader a sense of timing involved. So we understand, due to our own experiences, and I just realized the chapter popped up. So we understand, due to our own experience of the world, due to pacing, rhythm, and context of a story, that we can transplant our own experiences in the place of these characters, such as how long it takes to change facial expressions between panels, or how long it might take you to say a particular line. You can understand these things because you live it every single day. But this is especially pertinent when it comes to superhero comics, where there are things going on that we can't do. At least I haven't met anyone who can actually fly. So this brings us to what I actually want to talk about, and this is the chapter I'm working on at the moment. This is Indexical Lines and Polymorphic Imagery. And while the name might not sound very familiar, their functions are fundamental to comics, especially in superhero comics. So indexical lines are the collective term we give to things such as motion lines and lines of sight. So indexical lines, as you'll see in this diagram, fall into 2 categories: path lines and diegetic lines. Both act as arrows in order to direct the reader's attention to a specific focal point. However, each do it in different ways and for a different purpose. Like I said, there's a diagram on screen that is based on one created by Neil Cohen, but I've thrown in superhero stuff because I thought it made it look more cool. That sort of shows you how both path lines and diegetic lines break down into different areas. So this would be for path lines, motion, radical, and scope. And for diegetic, they have their own version of scopic and zooming. And I'm going to go through those quickly now. What I'm about to cover is a very condensed version of the chapter I'm working on. And to emphasize this, I have on screen all the raw data from just the first issue of Crisis on Infinite Earths. So if any of this gets really confusing or really boring, you can shut me up by donating to charity. That's my poor attempt at humor. But because I'm a sucker for Superman, I'll be using some Superman issues as examples here. So expect a lot of the Man of Steel. So beginning with motion lines, we have lines that denote both where the action begins and where it currently ends. In this example from John Burns' Man of Steel, you see the motion lines around Clark and his dog in the first two panels. We can see in this first panel that the dog jumps against Clark. Clark jolts back slightly. His head moves thanks to the weight of the dog's paws, and his right leg moves to shift his weight to compensate. This leads to the second panel, where now that the weight has shifted, Clark realizes there is nothing below his left leg, even shaking his foot slightly, as indicated by the motion lines, to double check. In the final panel, we see Clark flying through the air. The motion lines beginning exactly where Clark was in the previous panel, as shown by this small little sketch of the dog barking, and ends at Clark's current position. So different countries actually have different ways of presenting motion lines historically. And what we see here in American comics is almost a midway point. So European comics, as you'll see on the left, which is an old Tintin from Belgium, they use much shorter and limited amount of lines, as where with Japanese manga, you will see an excessive amount of lines to the point that it almost leads into reduction. So motion lines sort of bleed into the moving figure. And as I say, American comics sort of fit in between the two. And in fact, I would say that the reduction aspect of Japanese comics almost make an action more intense, as where with the Belgium example on the left, it's not as intense, maybe even slower in motion, or giving off the impression of something is slower. Of course, over time, we've had artists that have sort of blended these techniques a lot more obviously. An example being Jorge Jimenez, who for Scott Snyder's Justice League run did this fantastic homage to the Gohan Kamehameha in the Cell games, because I had to fit Dragon Ball somewhere. But if we go back to this image of Clark flying in terms of time, we know that the amount of time in this panel encompasses however long it took Clark to reach this point from the previous panel to where he is now. Based on the shaping of the line, we know that this is a very fast movement. You'll also note that the motion lines have a white coloration between them. And this is actually called a ribbon, and it's a technique wholly unique to American comics for a very long time. And it allows a clearer understanding of motion lines, especially once the pages are colored. So this idea of the ribbon is also frequently used with scopic lines, particularly with superhero books. Traditionally, pathline scopic lines show a character's line of sight. However, when you include the ribbon technique, you are now able to depict superhuman abilities such as X-ray vision or heat vision. In this example from Man and Superman, the light blue signifies the use of X-ray vision being used by Clark Kent. You understand directly where Clark is looking, and based on the color and context, you have a rough understanding of what he is looking at and why. However, this doesn't seem to denote anything to do with time. In contrast, if we make that ribbon for the scopic line red, you'll know that Superman is using his heat vision. This is where colored context comes in. For timing, it is very difficult to pinpoint how long this action would take without context. So finally, for path lines, we have radical lines. And these are a little different from the other two and are primarily used to give the effect of things like heat or smell coming from an object. In the example above, you can see this being used twice. First is the lines representing the light coming from the sun. Again, this does not give us a lot to work with in terms of time, except that it is either early in the day or perhaps even midday due to how high and bright the sun is. Secondary, we see Bruce and Clark drinking some form of hot beverage, and for simplicity's sake, let's just say it's coffee. So the lines coming from both mugs indicate that this is a particularly hot beverage. If it weren't for the fact that we see Clark pouring the coffee, then we'd still know that it was recently poured, just based on the radical lines. So moving to the other side of indexical lines, we have two very simple techniques that make up diegetic lines. And this is another form of scopic, and finally zooming. We're almost at the end, guys. The lecture is nearly over. So the diegetic version of scopic lines does not signify where a character is looking, but instead that something has caught the character's attention. In the example here, Superman comments to John to get his attention and causes him to turn around, and it's a very simple technique, but one that adds immediacy to a character's response. Without it, John is facing Superman. With it, John has rapidly turned around to face Superman. And finally, for lines, we have zooming. This is a technique that treats the frame like a camera and zooms in on a segment of the frame. In this case, we see lines coming in from the side to draw focus to Swamp Thing as he stares up to Superman. Again, this is a technique I'd say was being more used now because we are more prone to borrowing from things like manga. Again, this is a Joel Jimenez page, so no surprise. So finally, we have the polymorphic image. And you'll likely see this in terms of characters that can move very quickly, like Superman or the Flash. But polymorphic literally means multiple morphing. An image implementing polymorphic imagery shows multiple stages of movement within a single image. In terms of time, it allows an artist and a writer to show time moving at two different speeds for characters involved. So in this example here, you see Lois Lane alongside Clark as he changes into Superman. While there are multiple steps for Clark's transformation, Lois remains still. This implies that Clark is moving at a fast speed at the frame, faster speed than the frame can capture, but moves too quickly for Lois to fully react to. So polymorphic imagery is becoming increasingly prominent, especially in the last few months of superhero comics, thanks to Tom Taylor and Bruno Redondo's work on Nightwing. It's shown a great experimentation with polymorphic structure, an experimentation that has been greatly received by fans, especially with how well it suits this particular character. So for the cover of Nightwing number 83, the eye follows Nightwing in the same Z-path formation the Western comics follow. The eye begins with Nightwing swinging on from the rafters before jumping over the bars. Our eyes then follow Dick as he removes his Nightwing costume, slowly replacing it with a jacket, shirt, and jeans. As Dick reaches the last rung, he puts his bag containing his costume down, removes his mask, and just before he steps onto the stage at the bottom center of the page, and at the end of Dick's journey, he takes to the podium and announces, "My name is Dick Grayson, and I have an idea." I'm very aware that I'm using the textless version of this, but it is there in the original. So the cover acts as one large panel. We're framed within this moment with Dick's movements dictating the timing. We know from the speech balloon that the final stage of the cover takes the same amount of time it would to say, "My name is Dick Grayson and I have an idea." For each of the other steps, aside from swinging onto the rafters, we can use our own knowledge of hastily getting changed to get a sense of how fast Dick is moving. I'm only saying we can't use common knowledge for rafters because I'm assuming not everyone swings onto rafters every day. But in the second to last action, however, we see diegetic indexical lines in the form of scopic lines around Dick's eyes. And this draws specific attention to not only Dick's face, but shows that his own attention is on his face when he realizes he's still wearing this domino mask. This likely interrupts his pacing while moving to stop, realize, take it off, and then move, changing the pacing. But on September 16th, 2021, Tom Taylor and Bruno Redondo revealed through a Polygon article that Nightwing number 87 would be one continuous image. Just from the cover shown, we can see the same techniques from Nightwing issue 83's cover. Nightwing moving from the distance as he comes closer and closer into frame. While the act of swinging in the same manner of Nightwing is highly unlikely for us to do on a daily basis, we still have an understanding of how long it might take for an acrobat to cover this distance just based on real-world physics and moving around. But the initial press release for Nightwing 87 featured the first few pages of the book, although without color or lettering. We see Taylor and Redondo embracing the idea of capturing a moment in time, and in this case, capturing these specific moments as Dick travels through the city. In conclusion, while the idea of studying time might seem a little pointless, by examining these small little building blocks of comics, we can identify how the comic book medium can move forward. With work from creators like Taylor and Redondo, I'm hopeful that comics still have a very long way to go until there is nothing more to evolve. Thank you.